January 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power when he was appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Hindenburg. And it's important to say this represented and still represents the biggest historic defeat the world working class has ever experienced. And to get a sense of what that meant and what it would also mean if fascism returned to power in the 24th century, I think it's worth just saying what happened in the immediate aftermath of Hitler taking power in January 1933. Within 1 month, all basic civil rights were removed. Within 2 months, laws were passed barring Jews from employment in the public sector and the legal system, and the government ordered a boycott of Jewish businesses. Trade unions were abolished. Books deemed subversive, including works by Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, Franz Kafka and Karl Marx, were banned and put on bonfires and burned in public celebrations. Thousands of German Communist Party members have been rounded up, beaten and thrown into concentration camps. The party was banned, and 81 of its MPs, including its leader, was put in prison. Many to die. Its leader, Thalmer, died in 1944. And within 6 months, Germany was a one-party state. All organisations, whether cultural or social, which had any independence of the state, were now made subordinate to the state. It wasn't just the left or the trade unions, things like the YMCA was now brought under control of the German state. Nothing could be independent from that state. And of course, by 1935, the Nuremberg laws had ordered the complete separation of Jews and other non-Aryans from German society. It was a crucial stepping stone on the way to mass murder. And I think, again, it's important to say at this stage that Hitler never talked about murdering the Jews. He argued they should be separated from the Aryan population and removed from Germany. That is essentially what the BNP stand for today when they talk about, for instance, returning London to the picture they published in their GLA leaflet of a street party in 1953 of an all-white London. You know, they begin with this, but there is a logic, and of course the logic is what you do with people who were born and brought up in Germany or born and brought up in Britain. What are you going to do? Are they going to drive them out? If they haven't got anywhere to go, what happens? And I think it's important to say that that logic was at work from the very separation of that. And of course, Hitler's triumph was a prelude to the greatest catastrophe in human history, the Holocaust, where 11 million Jews, communists, trade unionists and others were slaughtered in Nazi concentration camps. So we have to remember the scale of that defeat and think about it today when we're talking about the threat of fascism. Adolf Hitler, an ex-corporal in the army, an ex-stormtrooper in the army, a house painter, a bohemian, was appointed, as I said, Chancellor in 30th of January 1933 by the German President Marshal Hindenburg. The aged aristocrat, a Prussian Junker, was not very keen on appointing Hitler. Until really the final months of 1932, it's worth saying as well that big business largely did not see Hitler as a solution and were not financing Adolf Hitler. You know, there was a reluctance to bring this man into government, let alone to power, because that's not really what the ruling class particularly liked. He was too much of an adventurer, he was regarded as unreliable. But the German ruling class had been caught in a situation where the scale of the economic and social crisis, which is sweeping Germany, had revived the very real and immediate fear of working class revolution, which they'd experienced just short years before in 1918 to 1923. And fresh in their minds was the November, as I say, 1918 revolution, which had forced Germany to end the First World War, and had sent the Kaiser into exile in Holland. It had been followed by a series of other revolutionary explosions over the following year. For much of the 1920s, Hitler was regarded as a fringe figure in German politics. In 1923, he had tried to emulate Benito Mussolini by staging what was effectively a military coup in Munich, believing that if you take control of Munich, this would open up the roads for a march in Berlin. That had ended in disaster because the revolutionary crisis was already fading and the German ruling class and the German state had no need of an adventurer like Hitler, and his troops, his stormtroopers were dispersed literally with rifle fire on the streets of Munich. and eventually Hitler served a very short prison sentence in remarkably liberal conditions compared to what the left was suffering in Germany at the time. Now, I say that because the argument from the liberals and political pundits then, as now, was the same, as we get told about Nick Griffin, the BNP, ignore him and he'll go away. You know, why make a fuss or but Hitler did not go away through the 1920s. He spent the rest of the decade building a tight party under his control, linked to a paramilitary wing, the Stormtroopers, and in particular he began building his own personal paramilitary organisation, much more closely tied to him, the SS, which, although small, was to become a central plank of the whole murderous Third Reich state in terms of that. And it was the return in 1929-1930 of a crisis in Germany which transformed the fortunes of Hitler's Nazi party. Again, I say, providing a warning that we ignore fascist organisations at our own peril. In May 1928, Hitler had secured just 2.6% of the vote in national elections. 2 years later, after the Wall Street crash and the beginning of a recession, and German capitalism had been rebuilt after the First World War by loans by essentially American capital and by exporting to America, so a recession in America immediately impacted into German society. In 2 years' time, his vote had gone from 2.6% to 18.3%. And by the end of 1931, membership of the Nazi Party stood at 800,000, and its paramilitary wing deployed 225,000 stormtroopers. By July 1932, the Nazi vote reached 37.4%, although it fell 4 months later to 33.1%, and that's worth bearing in mind that the Nazi support was showing evidence of decline immediately before Hitler came to power. The government which had been in charge of Germany at the beginning of this economic recession was a centre-left coalition presided over by a social democratic chancellor who would be eventually forced from office in 1929, but whose immediate response to the economic recession was to try and balance the books by cutting public spending. And again, there are parallels today with central-left governments all across the world faced with an economic crisis implementing here a version of neoliberal free market type politics. And it has to be said, again, when I come on to the situation of the German left, the SPD government, the German socialist government in Prussia, for instance, had in 1928 shot down May Day demonstrators in the streets of Berlin, a demonstration called by the communists, and had made the German Communist Party illegal, banned it in Prussia, the key state in the German Republic. So already there was bad blood on the German left, and of course we should also remember the SPD had been responsible for authorising the death of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht at the beginning of 1990. There was literally bad blood on the German left, and that's important when I come on to describe the differences. There is an element of rationality to it. But it was clear that the centre-left government faced with the economic crisis was not satisfactory for the German ruling class. And the German ruling class's preferred option from really 1929 to 1933 was to try and install a series of strong governments of a more typical sort of right-wing nature, presided over by normal-type politicians from the right wing of the political spectrum, who they believed could essentially emulate, later on, what Margaret Thatcher did in Britain. That was their preferred option. Big business, however, was radicalising. And it was radicalising in two ways. The first was, it was determined to eradicate the gains of the Weimar Republic, which had been, the German ruling class had been forced to concede to avert revolution. That was particularly the welfare state and unemployment benefit. They wanted to get rid of that. The second radicalisation of the German ruling class was Germany faced with an economic recession, being excluded from exporting to America, but also to significant sectors of the globe dominated by British and French capital, who created their own trading blocs. Increasingly, sections of the German ruling class returned to the pre-1914 project of German imperialism, which was to look to carve out markets and raw materials, control raw materials, in Eastern and Southeastern Europe.